It is a
Let's
shocking
check the
fact
length
that
on the
by
sign.
today's standards, we
A
catch
fine
fish
stringer
much
of
worse
pike
than our
and perch.
great-grandfathers did.
The-
They knew nothing
There
of
you
modern
are.
echo sounders,
Gotcha now.
branded soft plastics, or the marketing legends surrounding miracle boilies. Imagine the mid-20th century. In post-war villages across Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, and Kazakhstan. People would head to the river with a simple rod made of a bamboo joint, a fishing line
The coarse
thicker
fiber
than
line
a
is secured
hair,
to the bent iron
and
nail hook with a
fashioned
hand-tied
from a
knot.
bent
This
nail.
creates
Despite this, they consistently brought home full buckets of roach, ID, crucian carp, white-eye bream, and chub. Today, we are armed with expensive gear, yet we often return home with the same old excuse. The fish just weren't biting today. But the truth is, it isn't the fish that have changed. It is the information. The conflict between the old and the new begins right here. Fishing in our time has become an arena of myths, suggesting that a good catch can be bought with money. However, the real experience of generations tells a different story. Nature does not read advertisements. To understand the scale of the knowledge we have lost, we must return to the past, specifically the decades between 1920 and 1940. These were hungry, difficult years, smelling of smoke and war. In villages near Smolensk, boys gathered bait directly from the garden before running to the Dnieper to catch bleak, which moved in schools like silver flashing in the sunlight. In the Polisy region, peasants pulled out massive tench by baiting them with oil cake, which lasted an entire season. In Siberia, on the tributaries of the Ob, fishing fed entire families. Ed and burbot were strategic food products, and in winter, the only sound at the fishing holes was the crackling of the frost. Before the war, children spent every spare moment running to the water. The perch were fat and dense, biting until the sun went down. These people caught so much, not simply because there were more fish, but because they knew exactly what to look for, when, and how. Their gear was primitive, but their knowledge was profound. Today, that knowledge is drowning in myths. One of the most harmful claims is, if you love fish, buy it expensive bait. But a fish's biology does not change based on the price of your bait container. Fish behavior is governed by simple physics and biology. Water temperature determines the metabolic rate, oxygen levels, and the strength and duration of feeding. For example, at 14 to 18 degrees Celsius, carp and crucian carp enter a phase of active feeding because their metabolism doubles in speed. Bream stay in pits where the current brings dissolved oxygen, while pike choose spots where they can conserve energy, such as submerged logs, windows in the grass, or quiet backwaters. No magic store-bought bait can change the biology of a species. If the water heats up above 25 degrees Celsius in the summer heat, oxygen becomes scarce and the fish become passive. They aren't refusing to bite because your bait is wrong, but because their bodies are effectively in battery-saving mode. However, let's be honest, many grandfatherly tips don't work either. For instance, the myth that fish bite best during a thunderstorm is dangerous romanticism. In reality, a sharp drop in pressure hits the fish's internal swim bladder system, causing most species to stop feeding actively. Or the advice that noise attracts pike? It might attract something, but only your own disappointment. The pike is an ambush predator that values silence and predictability. Incorrect advice circulates on fishing forums like ghosts. Everyone has heard of them, but no one has verified them. Yet, there is other knowledge that truly works, passed down from old fishermen in the Kuban steppes, from Taiman hunters on the Yenisei, and from grandfathers catching crucian carp in the overgrown ponds of the Moscow region. This knowledge was always simple. For example, fish stay where there is shelter, food, and comfort. If you are looking for crucian carp, look at the edge of the grass. If you want chub, look for shade, ripples, and bridges. Perch love schools of fry, so look for splashes and ripples. Gear only works if it doesn't scare the fish. Thin line, a small hook, and minimal weight. Ground bait should be natural. Small particles attract, while large ones satisfy. No marketing fairy tale can replace this understanding. You must give the fish a reason to approach. Most importantly, over the last few decades, we have lost entire layers of knowledge about free and effective baits used by generations. If you think I am talking about worms, the story goes much deeper. It is so deep that right under your feet, in your own soil, grows a bait that fish prefer 3 times more than most store-bought options. We will get to that, but for now, remember this. Fishing has always been a matter of generations. Knowledge is not sold in packages. It is passed through hands, from father to son, from a neighbor to a boy holding a rod for the first time, from an old fisherman on the shore to someone ready to listen rather than argue. Only practice determines who is right. If you look closely at the history of fishing in the USSR, you notice a strange pattern. The fewer the shops, the bigger the catch. In the 1950s on the Volga near Astrakhan, fishermen went to the channels with a jar filled with something most people today wouldn't even pick up off the ground. In the north, near Arkhangelsk, children managed to catch enough for the family dinner before school. A couple of hooks, some line, and live bait dug right up from the path were all they needed. In the steppe regions of Kazakhstan, peasants caught wild carp using what they gathered in the dry clay soil under an old well. In the villages of the Bryansk region in the 1930s, the concept of buying bait didn't even exist. Fishing was not a hobby. It was a survival strategy. The most effective bait didn't come in boxes labeled premium, but grew underfoot. It is striking how quickly this has vanished from collective memory. After the 1960s, as the network of fishing stores expanded across the Union, the focus shifted. The population was convinced that real fishing required buying the right chemicals, the right feed, and the right bait. The brighter the packaging, the better the bite, or so they said. But fish don't care about packaging. Let's add some science to clarify. Fish react to water chemistry, not advertising. If you understand how this chemistry works, the myths fall apart. For example, the common belief that the worm is the best universal bait is based only on human habit. In reality, a worm is just one possible protein source, and far from the fattest or most nutritious. When water warms to between 20 and 23 degrees Celsius, most freshwater fish intensify their search for high-energy food. They are accumulating fat, recovering after spawning, and preparing for the cold. However, a worm contains about 10% protein and a maximum of 5% fat. It's like being offered a cracker before running a marathon. A fish will choose whatever provides more calories for less effort. This is why the miracle float baits advertised since the 1970s failed in reality. They contained nothing that signaled a high-value meal to the fish. You cannot deceive biology. Water temperature directly affects a fish's reaction speed. For instance, perch become active when the temperature stays between 16 and 20 degrees Celsius, as their muscles work faster. They hunt in schools, relying on their lateral line, a system of channels that detect vibrations. Crucian carp, conversely, love warm, stagnant ponds, but if oxygen is low, they simply freeze at the bottom and barely feed. This explains why there is often a total lull in biting during the summer heat. It's not because the fish are spoiled by store-bought bait, but because the water is too hot, oxygen dissolves poorly, and the fish's body stops wasting energy. Pressure also plays a key role. During a sharp drop, the fish's swim bladder changes volume, disrupting its balance. This is why crucian carp often become completely passive before a weather front, while zander might come out to feed at dusk when the pressure stabilizes. Since we are debunking myths, let's tackle another one. That fish are afraid of flashlight beams at night. On the Far East, fishermen knew better. Light doesn't scare them. It attracts small fry, which in turn draws in predators. Fish don't care where the light comes from. They orient themselves by movement and smell. While you shouldn't shine a light directly into the water because it creates shadows and noise, scattered light acts as a magnet for food. Yet, many continue to blame everything but themselves for a poor catch, blaming the gear, the weather, or the advice. The real enemy is a lack of understanding of fish ecology. Now, let's talk about practice, the kind that was a common skill for any teenager in Soviet villages. Location is the key. It is useless to hope that fish will come out into the open channel for our convenience. Tench stay in overgrown windows where the silt is soft and the water is warm. Bream are on the edges of the current where food rolls down. Chub love ripples and the cold shadows under trees. Even the pike, which seems like a mindless predator, chooses an ambush based on minimizing energy expenditure, in a pool near a snag, or in a gap among the reeds. If you choose the wrong spot, no super bait will pull the fish to where it is uncomfortable. As for ground bait, its job is to gather, not to feed. Old fishermen in the Kostroma region threw a mixture of bloodworms and steamed pearl barley into the water. Small fish gathered first. Roach arrived in 15 minutes and bream in an hour. Today, many buy bright boxes, but forget that the fish cares about the naturalness of the food, not the brand. We are now approaching the most painful topic, the lost free baits. Every region of the USSR had its secrets. In the Volga region, they caught fish on bark beetle larvae found under the bark of old willows. In Siberia, they dug up earth mothers, thick rhinoceros beetle larvae found in compost heaps. In the Kuban, they used fat white larvae from rotten stumps. All these baits provided a stable bite, but as trade developed, a new image emerged. If you want to fish like a professional, you must buy. Fishermen were told that store-bought bait is always better than natural bait, and the knowledge of generations vanished almost as quickly as rural trades. Surprisingly, traces of this knowledge lasted longer in post-Soviet regions than in the US or Europe. In villages near Rechitsa in Belarus until the 1990s, old men were still digging up white larvae in their gardens before going for crucian carp. In Tatarstan villages, you can still hear grandmothers say, "There is nothing better than larvae. They are fat, and the fish love them." Indeed, a fish's biological instinct is formed over millions of years, not decades of marketing. To link the past and the future, we must return to the tradition of self-harvesting bait. This isn't about romance or nostalgia. It's about pragmatism. Larvae are natural food that fish know and trust. Store-bought bait is an attempt to make a copy that is rarely equal to the original. Imagine walking into the yard of an ordinary house somewhere near Tambov or Chernihiv, picking up a shovel, making a single cut into the sod, and pulling out a bait that surpasses not only the worm, but most of the bio-super wonders forced upon us for the last 30 years. This is the bait known to almost all Soviet fishermen in the first half of the 20th century, but which most today don't even take seriously. The larvae of the cockchafer, May beetle, and rose chafer. This white living mass is resilient, fatty, and shaped like the letter C. This larva can survive several bites, stay on the hook longer than a worm, and attract fish so strongly that the difference in catch becomes almost indecent. This is a real phenomenon explained by biology, chemistry, and practice. In the USSR, These larvae were part of the rural economy. In Ukrainian villages near Poltava, children gathered cockchafers before fishing as a morning exercise. In Belarus, especially in the Vitebsk and Mogilev regions, May beetle larvae were the gold standard for crucian carp. On the Altai, they were used for ID in small rivers where the water is cold and crystal clear. In Russia, along the wide floodplains of the Oka, these larvae were used for decades to catch zander. The paradox is that as shops developed, this bait began to be seen as poor man's bait. People came to believe that bought meant professional, even though any ichthyologist will tell you that fish orient themselves solely on nutritional value, smell, and appearance. A May beetle larva is a protein-fat bomb. According to Soviet biological research from the 1960s, the nutritional value of these larvae reaches 35 to 40% protein and 20 to 25% fat. For comparison, these figures are significantly lower in earthworms. A fish, sensing the smell of fat in the water, reacts faster because fat dissolves and spreads a long chemical trail. This is simple biochemistry. Fats are an energy source especially valuable in mid to late summer when fish are actively accumulating resources. After rain, larvae living in the upper soil layers often end up near the surface, washed into ditches and rivers. Fish have been accustomed to this seasonal food flow for millennia. Bream and silver bream stand at the edge of the bank and the channel precisely because everything from the topsoil, worms, beetles, larvae, drains there. The chub, the cunning bandit of riverbanks, often strikes at anything bright and moving that falls from overhanging grass. Crucian carp and tench in warm ponds stir up the mud in the morning specifically looking for large larvae. You don't need to explain to a fish that a cockchafer larva is food. It knows this better than we do. Evolution has built this reflex into its brain. A fish might play with a worm, but it often grabs a larva immediately and deeply. Its white color, dense consistency, and high energy value make the bite more aggressive. In Soviet villages, there was a saying, "A cockchafer isn't a worm. The fish doesn't chew it, it eats it." Roach, perch, ID, crucian carp, and even pike grab the larva confidently. The larva stays on the hook for a long time because its chitinous skin is dense and elastic. It doesn't fall apart or tear during a cast. Its internal composition, a fat capsule and dense protein body, makes the bait resistant to 2 or 3 bites, or even more. This is crucial for fishing in currents where constant recasting is the norm. In the post-Soviet 1990s, when shops were filled with miracle baits and magazines were full of ads for attractants and dips, old men continued their own way. In the villages of Russia and Kazakhstan during the economic decline, people remembered the old methods. They dug up larvae and went to the river, and they caught fish just like in the old days. Biology hadn't changed. Fish will always prefer what they eat in nature. In the middle latitudes, cockchafer larvae are largest from July to September. Before the frost, they go deeper, and in spring, they rise back up. Experienced fishermen knew that early spring and late summer were the best seasons for harvesting. Harvesting larvae is a ritual. They live in the top layer of soil, usually from 5 to 20 centimeters deep, in moist but not swampy earth rich in roots. Old gardens and orchards were the treasuries of bait. The soil must be loose. If the sod is as hard as asphalt, there is little chance. After rain is the ideal time. Old fishermen would cut a piece of sod, flip it over, and the larvae would reveal themselves among the roots. They always put the sod back to preserve the resource. For storage, they used tin cans or glass jars filled with moist soil. Not mud, but damp earth like soft peat. Larvae could live in this for a week or two, if kept in a cool, dark place like a cellar. There are three main ways to hook them: longitudinal, through the back; transverse, through the head area for long casts; and hidden, fully burying the hook for fishing in snags. You must never pierce the larva multiple times, or it loses its internal pressure and attractiveness. On quiet ponds, a slow-falling presentation works best, as the larva is naturally heavy and sinks with a slight sway. On large rivers like the Dnieper or Volga, the larva is drifted with the current. Bream can smell the fat from a distance. Perch react to the white silhouette with vertical play. Even pike, in murky water where fry are scarce, will strike a white larva as a trigger. There are several myths to debunk. First, that the larva is too soft and fish easily pull it off. This is false. Its skin is tougher than a worm's. Second, that it doesn't work in cold water. It does, but you must use smaller specimens. Third, that it is only for crucian carp. In reality, everything from bleak to zander will take it. For gear, use thin lines, 0.1 to 0.14, and small hooks for ponds, and slightly heavier setups for rivers. The most important thought is that bait is only half the success. The other half is location, time, and presentation. If you want to catch fish, think like a fish, the old-timers said. A fish thinks about where it is safe, where it can breathe, and where the food is. The larva fits this logic perfectly. It is natural, familiar, and energy-rich. When we forgot about it, we forgot the essence of fishing, its connection to nature rather than the store shelf. The industry doesn't talk about larvae because it isn't profitable. If you realize the best bait is in your garden, you stop buying their products. But the truth of fishing doesn't disappear. It waits for those ready to dig a little deeper. If this story has changed the way you look at the pests in your garden or the history beneath your feet, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the history they tried to bury and the knowledge that actually puts fish in the bucket. Let's plant the seeds for a better future of fishing. The next treasure of traditional wisdom will be revealed soon.